Welcome to the Stories That Shape Us podcast. My name is Joanna Daniel. Today I have a guest. I was a guest on Cynthia's podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she read a quote at the end that captivated my attention. And I thought, well, this is about our stories. Let's go talk about it. So I invited Cynthia to come on this podcast to share with us so we can have a conversation about this. And the thing is, before we started the podcast, we were having this rich conversation. And I think that is really the stories that shape us. So welcome, Cynthia.
Hello.
To the Stories That Shape Us podcast. Cynthia is a mom and
Yes,
she's a wife. She's an HR consultant, and Cynthia is a podcaster. We can
yes.
share a little bit about your podcast later on, Cynthia, because I think it's such a unique format that you have
Hmm.
that I really liked. And Cynthia's podcast is face to face,
Yes,
so
yes,
I'm,
it
we will share a little bit more about that later on.
is.
So the quote that Cynthia read, and I don't know who coined this quote. So we would give credit if we knew who, but
Yes,
I don't know
exactly.
who.
Yeah, we don't.
Is new generational wealth is growing up in a home where you witness respect, healthy conflict resolution, and mutual support between your parents. And I thought, whoa, let's talk about that. Where did you find it, Cynthia? Was it on social media?
It was on social media. I saw it and it stood out to me, and I thought this is something that's not really discussed or even possibly not even valued, because when you think about generational wealth, the original definition has always been, money, land, properties, and that's the norm of when you think about generational wealth. And that's, with the way the world is going, a lot of people are very focused on actually how do I pass on generational wealth to my children? What do I need to do? There's lots of talks about trust and doing this and doing that, but actually there's less talk about this kind of generation wealth, you know
Yeah,
and these are things that was, I think, sustain people's mental health, sustain people's mind, and also relationships, because no man is an island, Joanna, and I think that we need to
absolutely.
understand that.
Absolutely, and you're so right. I have, you see, there are a dime a dozen now. I think on social media where there is wealth advisors, and this is how you get wealth, and but there's something else that is being, and I think trauma is sinister. It's pervasive. It's going from one generation to the next, and not enough people are paying attention to the impact of trauma on our families and the things that we can do to support people. And I think, as we were talking earlier, sometimes because we don't know our stories and the traumatic, the only story that gets passed on is the traumatic one, not the other one.
That's right, and that's the truth, because people, it goes back to something like, when you see the news, a lot of the news is very negative, and it's
Yeah.
all the sort of the traumas that is actually going on, rather than there are some good news. I'm sure there's, we know, Joanna, there's good news out there,
Oh
but
yeah.
that doesn't seem to sell. That doesn't seem to be what people want to talk about or to pass on or have conversations about. And so it goes back to the same thing about what you're saying. It is say, trauma is something that people want to, sometimes, even I feel like it's even like they don't even want acknowledge it that's happened.
Yeah.
And even if they do acknowledge it, then it's like they don't know what to do about it.
Hmm.
And also, there is an aspect that is like, if I have maybe money or wealth
Mm.
or have all these things, my trauma will be less. I won't have that trauma. I won't feel the way that I feel. I'll be better off. I can do the things that maybe I didn't do. So people end up focusing a lot about accumulating something and having a legacy for their kids, and rather than actually thinking about a holistic view. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do need those things, but there is a legacy that you want to leave your children that keeps them intact, keeps them married, keeps their children healthy and
Yeah.
growing and flourishing.
Yeah. Like, how do I give my child emotional regulation tools? How do I help them to understand and manage their emotions? How do I help them to not suppress it? How do
Yes.
I model, like in the quote, it says respect between parents? And that's such a simple thing. Like, that means there's not enough of that in homes. And so what children are seeing instead is a model that says, well, I don't have to respect. This is how I speak to people. And also because they've been spoken to like that, so they go through life sometimes with a lack of respect for self.
Hmm.
And there's this anger sometimes when people say there's a chip on your shoulder. There's not a chip on the shoulder. It's just unresolved things, because I never learned how to deal with it, and that's so important. But you talk about denial, Cynthia. We work with Christians, and I always sometimes put the denial in that frame as well. What do you think about that? Because we sometimes spiritualize trauma, and so it doesn't make us want to address it, and so it
Yes.
leads to
Other things. I mean, it's like, one of the things, and one of the quotes that I've even come across is that, people think sometimes, and I'm not saying these going to worship is not a good thing. Sometimes they think that, I went to worship and I've sang my heart out and I've prayed and so forth, and so now it's been resolved. There's a typical saying of, Jesus take the wheel, and they think when Jesus take the wheel, that's like a way of just passing it on and letting him take control. But actually, God has given us power to step on serpents and scorpions, and sometimes our serpents and scorpions are the traumas that we've gone through that needs to be dealt with.
absolutely. Absolutely. We have power to step on serpents and scorpions and all the forces of the enemy. I love that verse. And nothing shall by any means harm you. But here we are sitting ducks, really, because things are harming us. We're passing this wealth on, well, lack of wealth on,
Mm,
poverty on, I think, emotional poverty we're passing
that's
on.
right.
As opposed to emotional wealth. We're passing on emotional poverty for our children all the time, saying, I'm praising. And so people like two coping strategies, prayer and worship. And
Yeah.
those are good coping strategies. But sometimes we need more. We need more than that.
Definitely. Definitely. And it goes back to even the scriptures. When we look at the story of Saul, when he's been afflicted and he'd gone through certain things, and there's times that David would go and play, and it will soothe him for a period of time,
Hmm.
but it always come back. That's what
Yeah.
people understand
Yeah.
about that story, that it never, that worship, that playing, that music did something for a period of time that was temporary. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that was lasting. And
No.
so we need to think about some of these stuff. Yes, they can make you feel and put you in a good place, but
Yeah.
how do I get to a place where I can sustain this
Mm.
state of mind, sustain dealing with these things, and also maybe it's me in my line that needs to say
Mm.
no. It stops here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of thinking about denial and thinking about you know um God is going to deal with it. Oh, I've been with God and God loves me, and that's all great. God does love you, but He requires us to also do things, to work with Him in partnership, to develop and face up to things that we need to face up to. And
Yeah.
because if you don't accept that something's happened or something is happening, because sometimes people are still there,
Yeah.
you can't then manage or solve the problem. It's like, Joanna, I like to ask you, it's like someone have to go to counseling or to seek help in some way. Don't they have to first accept
Absolutely.
that there's
Absolutely.
something going on?
Absolutely, because you can't fix what you don't accept. Because what you're fixing, you have to accept that something is going on. You have to accept that something is wrong. You have to come to that place of awareness and then decision. To be able to say, okay, I've accepted that I do not have good conflict resolution skills, as the quote says. I shout, I'm angry, I don't take responsibility for my actions, I blame people, I can't, I shut down. When there's a conflict, I avoid it. We have to say those things. We have to know those things to go, you know what? I need to go to a counselor. I need to go to therapy to learn how to not avoid conflict. Everything is not conflict. Every disagreement is not conflict. So I need to go understand that. I need to go have some tools to be able to deal with disagreements and hard conversations that it doesn't have to lead to. Because I tell you what, Cynthia, the thing that is telling us that it's going to be conflict is because of what we've seen before, and
Right.
where we never see healthy communication, where we never see healthy conflict, where we never see people talk about things that matter in a way that was respecting of the other person and accountable and responsible. We've not seen, so people who haven't seen that automatically assume, if I have to disagree with Cynthia, we're going to argue, and I don't want to argue, so I'm not going to disagree. I'm just going to pretend like I agree. And we become passive aggressive, lock it in our bodies, which create its own problems, and so on and on the cycle goes. So, but yeah, awareness first.
Yeah, I honestly believe that, and I think you lock it in, but it comes out in different
Oh yeah,
ways. said, it comes out and people know. And also, then you're not consistent with that person, because if you don't agree with that person,
Mm.
it's like you're, if they need you for something, then you've that almost like that anger or bitterness or that suppression is there, and you can't really connect, and then it affects your relationship with other people. I think one of the words that I like to use is that people need to understand there is a difference between, an honest conflict, and it's
Yeah.
like an honest conflict that you are actually dealing with conflict, but it's honest. You're honest.
Yes.
Than a,
Yes.
than a dishonest harmony. You
Oh, I love that. I love that. Honest conflict as opposed to dishonest harmony.
Yes.
Ooh, my nervous system can't cope with the dishonest harmony. And I don't suppose anybody is, but I'm more attuned to it. Like, oh, this environment isn't, and that's why we said the space is not safe, because it's dishonest harmony in the space. I love that, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Dishonest
Honestly,
harmony.
it hits all the, because that's what people always feel like. The fact that I'm not saying anything, the fact that I'm not acknowledging it,
Yeah.
but the harmony that you have is dishonest.
Dishonest.
It's not an honest, and some people are attracted to having a dishonest harmony, because it's like, oh, let's just keep everything as it is. And sometimes those dishonest harmony pass down the generations. Those
Oh,
are
it
all
does.
things that can be passed on, and it's carried through your family line. So no one then takes accountability. No one has an honest conflict that
Yeah.
allows things to be resolved and to be brought out. And then it affects marriages, it affects sibling, causes maybe sibling rivalry, so many things that comes about. And of course, miscommunication can be brought through that, because you're not communicating
Yeah.
honestly.
No.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody's honest. Nobody's honest. It feels like the dishonest harmony feels like a very unsafe situation to be in,
that's right. It is. It is,
because
because you're
nobody's being
walking on eggshells,
authentic.
aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like you're
Yeah.
walking on
Yeah.
eggshells. You're trying to, because it's not honest, there's no truth there. And so you're
No.
walking around and you don't know what's going to trigger, what's going to cause a
Yeah.
conflict, because the honesty
Mm.
hasn't come out. So actually, this and this is what affects me and makes me upset and hurts me, or whatever. So you don't actually know the things that causes the conflict, and so then
Yes.
you're then around actually trying
Yeah.
to trying to work out how to behave and conduct yourself in an environment, and
Yeah.
in a place where you're supposed to be safe, like your home and your
You know.
marriage, and your children feeling safe. That's a
Yeah.
quite scary thing, Joanna.
Oh, it is a scary thing. It really is. I think it feels like violence, because you're not going to be able to connect emotionally. So there's this sense, there's this massive deficit
You're
in
right.
this space. And sometimes we think children don't know. We think children don't know that there's this harmony between us. Like if my husband and I argue, but the children never hear it, we go downstairs and I'm pretending to like him, and I do not like him today. And I'm pretending that I want to speak, and I'm being civil and say good morning, good afternoon, yes, no, and I'm using those just one word answers. The children will sense the atmosphere and they will know that something is wrong. That's dishonest harmony, and sometimes that can carry on for weeks in a home,
Yes.
all the time
Oh,
believing. uh,
I
yeah, some
I think
people
for years. I think some
some
people can
people
have it
talk
for years.
some people talk through their children. Tell
Yes.
your mother say, tell your mother say, this. Tell your father his dinner is ready. Tell your mother. They don't, for years they'll talk to the children and not to each other, and so the children have this dysfunction
Yeah,
happening, and make a decision. I don't want to have anything to do with that. I'll never marry.
that's it.
I don't want it. I don't want your God either, because he
That's
can't
it.
help you.
Yeah, I was just about to say, sometimes they do it within the church building.
Yeah,
They go
yeah,
and worship, drive to work, and then or drive to church, and they are there in church, and they are in these prominent positions, and they're talking about that particular. God is funny sometimes. He make you eat your words. You may go to that
oh
that
yeah.
particular that particular day on church will be talking about love and forgiveness, and then you're there,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
you're
yes, yeah,
pushing. You're pushing this concept, and your children are there because they know they've experienced this honest harmony in your house, and there is no love and forgiveness. There is none of the stuff that you're peddling in church. And so then what you're then doing is that you're telling them that actually you're is dishonest in church. And the God that you serve is also dishonest, and he doesn't
Mm,
mind a
mm,
dishonest harmony. Just can carry on.
mm. Whoa. And that's what we're passing on. So honesty is important, understanding, being able to speak. But I have to preface this with many women in homes, and well, I mean, not only women, but in homes where it's domestic abuse, there's no freedom to do that
Right.
because of that. You're not free to express yourself because of fear of, and sometimes the fear is a physical threat
That's right.
because of the threat. So I need to speak to that woman that we know that you're not being dishonest, you're surviving.
Yes.
That
Yes.
person who is literally just surviving because you're not free to make those kind of decisions and those kind of calls because you're trying to keep yourself and the children safe. Totally get that. What we're talking about is the people where there's trauma and we're acknowledgement, where we're not acknowledging and we're feeling that things are going to be resolved on their own without support, without help. And we're passing this lack of conflict resolution skills to our children with this dishonest harmony. I see so many places where this exists, so many pockets of places where the dishonesty exists. And we're just like, I mean, you can make a decision. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing dishonest harmony. My thing is, if I'm not emotionally safe, I'm not hanging around.
I'm the same.
I'm
I'm the
not
same.
hanging around. Yeah.
And I sense it. Sometimes I could just walk into a building and there's a certain level of energy, like a vibe that you get, and you're like,
Yeah.
it's not. And it happens. And I like to speak to those that even in the workplace. I mentioned it a little bit earlier on. There are people. Dishonest harmony is not just within the relationships in your homes.
Yeah.
There are things in your work. You may go into a workplace. You might have an interview with panel members, but there's a dishonest harmony that you sense that
Yeah.
is going on. You may ask them, when you're on the interview panel and then or you're the person they're interviewing and you ask them a question, their answers are not honest, and you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are, to me, are red flags to tell you whether you should carry on pursuing.
Do I want to work for these people? Uh,
100%.
Maybe not.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
can't
Because
compromise my emotional safety to work here.
yes, that's right. And sometimes people get swayed because of the prestige, the money. You
Yeah.
know, I need this work, or I want to, or you're trying to leave a place that you feel that it's got dishonest harmony to another place. Actually, it's probably going to be worse. And
Yeah.
so your blinkers are on, and you just don't want to face up to some of the stuff that's going on because
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
are things that they are telling you. Your gut, your instincts are telling you that you shouldn't be moving forward with this,
Absolutely.
and you're still going there. And you know you spend a lot of time in the workplace,
Mm.
and if you don't have honest conflict and a place where you're having to be dishonest, and a lot of people is it code switching or something,
Mm.
that's in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
You then It's very difficult then to uncode switch yourself when you come home. You have to,
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. You
you know
be
that,
one thing here, one thing there, and
that's right.
yeah,
That's
there's a
right.
crossover often. There's a crossover, but I believe that if you are the person who are honest and want to be, and you can make a decision to defend and protect yourself against that and say, no, I can't do this. And maybe for a time, people sometimes think I have the bills to pay, and so because of that I have to suffer. But your nervous system is suffering too. You're compromising your health by being in a situation like that. But I want to go back to the children, Cynthia, witnessing the dishonest harmony, the conflict that never gets resolved, the things that never gets talked about, the passive aggressive or passivity that's in the space and at home, and how they are learning, but parents are not aware. They're not knowing that this is affecting the children
Mm.
because they're not aware of how much it is affecting the children. And what are some of the things that you think? Let's talk about what are some of the things that people can do to take a hold of that and to change, because before we go there, my mind always runs along ahead of me, Cynthia. But I'm thinking about the stories that shape us. For example, what are some of the stories you think that shape people, that makes them get to the place where conflict resolution is a fear? They have a fear of doing that.
For me, I think one of the things is the fact that loss and
Loss.
abandonment is a big thing for a lot of people. They
Yeah.
think, and it's not just a physical abandonment, so there's an emotional abandonment, they also fear.
Sure.
Because faced up to some of the things, you think that the person's not going to like you anymore. They're not going to,
Mhm.
want to talk to you or connect with you. And so you rather just suppress and not discuss it, you know, and also actually face up to the fact that sometimes you're also complicit in the reasons
Mm,
things are, you know, people, because if you face, when you have to face up to some of the things that has happened, there is a level of accountability that also sometimes need to take place.
absolutely.
So if you're bringing something up, then you've got to also face yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to face and take responsibility for their part. And I'm not saying that they are completely, but there is a part sometimes that we play that we don't want to face.
Yeah. There's a part we play that we don't want to face. And that's true. That we don't totally have we have volition. We've not totally lost our ability to choose. But when we don't choose, we are choosing. So
Yes,
be acknowledging of the things that the part that you play in that, and take ownership of that, and that's how things change.
that's how things change. Because if you face up to it and you say, right, what was my, you know, because one of the things I always say to people is that whenever you think of an issue or a concern,
Mm,
the always I tend to always go to how does what is my part? Think of it like a film. You know, we love to make ourselves the what do you call it, the hero
the
of
hero.
every
We might
you
be
know.
the villain sometimes, and that's true. Yeah, it's
And
true.
sometimes we are actually, if it was, if the actual scene that you were talking about was put on a film on TV, would people see you as the hero or the villain of that story?
Mm. But it's
You
hard.
know,
It's so hard to, because that's such an uncomfortable thing to sit with, that I was wrong. And that's what you're saying. Like, if you're the villain, you have to own that, the fact that in that scenario, that was me. I was wrong. It's not easy to do. I say it's always people who are courageous who are able to do that.
oh wow. Well, I mean, why did you say that, Joanne? When you said courageous, what's the tools do you think that they need to have to be able to get to that place? Is that taught or is that something that's innate?
It's not. It's. I don't think it's necessarily innate. Maybe some people might develop it over time through environment, learn it. But I think we can develop the courage to own our stuff. We can develop the courage to take ownership of things that we do wrong, whether we are aware of it or not. Sometimes people might reflect things to you, and it might be hard to hear. And so courage is going. You take a deep breath and you said, "I did it. I'm really sorry I did it. I didn't intend to hurt you. I see that you're hurt and I apologize." That's courage. Because what's not courageous, the easy way out is say, "I didn't do that. And why are you just telling me?" When, why are you just telling me? And remember when you did that, that's not courage. That's the easy way out. That's the coward's way out. For want of a better word, I'd frame it a little bit differently, because because I get to help people resolve both, and I understand both, but I think it takes courage. But we can grow in courage. We can grow in our ability to say, "I want to get to the place where I can own my mistakes. I'm not
Yes,
there, but I want to get there
yes. And
where I can really own it."
yeah, and it also helps the children
Mm,
to accept their own, you know, because you're teaching the children to accept ownership of things they do wrong.
absolutely.
Because what happens is you brought about, and also there's also fear
Yeah.
that creeps in when you know, I don't want to accept that I'm wrong. It's not me, and also pride. And we know
Yes.
pride. What happens?
Yeah.
It comes before a fall, and you
Oh,
will
yeah.
fall. That's
Oh,
without a
yeah.
doubt. And
Without that.
you want to bring an example to your children that, you know what, and I teach my son all the time. I said, I want you to tell me when you've done something wrong, and let's talk about why those things happened.
Yeah.
And it's a part of getting to, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Oh,
I
it is.
it's an opportunity to get to know that person, to
Yeah.
get to their thinking, their mind, and so forth.
Yeah.
Because there is always the reason that may not make sense to you, the
Yeah.
outside, but there's a reasoning that's going on why the person did what they did, and it's about getting to know that person in their core and who they are and how
Yeah.
they.
Yeah, absolutely. While you were talking, I thought of something like a parent who won't take responsibility, where there's no healthy conflict resolution skills in the space, and don't take responsibility. You know what happens to the children? They have to look after the parent emotionally. That means, because a parent will do something, and because they don't take ownership and responsibility, then if the child gets to the stage where they start to say, "Well, I can say, well, mom or dad, you did this," they will beat them down with their words, like, "I didn't do it. How could you ever think like that?" Or it was because I was, and then the child having to, that's it's such a confusing thing to go, hang on, was I wrong? Maybe I
Mm,
was wrong. Oh, look, they're so distressed. Mom's crying and says she's a bad mother. Mom, you're not a bad mother. I'm sorry I said that. You're not a bad mother. You're a good mother. And dad, thank you for working hard for us. So that what happens now is the child starts to take responsibility for the parent's behavior. But that is so confusing. What it does is the confusion says, well, I can't trust myself. I can't trust my decisions. I can't trust my intuition. I can't trust what I feel. I can't trust what's happening. And it gives them a distrust for themselves. And so that's another way we pass on this deficit, because now there are children who don't know how to make decisions. They don't know when somebody has hurt them. They don't know, they don't have any boundaries. They go through life trying to people please or become codependent because they're having to, in a space where there's poor management skills, they learn to look after their parents' emotions so that they have to deny their own.
that's incredible, and it's really it's quite sad. I think it's quite hurtful as well and painful for
Yeah.
people, for the children, because ultimately, they're going to become adults themselves,
Yeah.
like you said. And also, what happens when they're married? What happens when they've
Yeah.
got their own kids? What
For
happens when
sure.
what happens when their children? Because sometimes what happens is, the children that their children comes and try to tell them, oh, but daddy or mummy, you did this, and then they start acting the way their parents
Yeah.
are acting. And and one of the things that I wanted to ask Joanna, because it's really bizarre, because sometimes you have this kind of passed down generational thing to the
Mm.
children. The
Hmm.
children then have children of their own, and obviously then their parents become grandparents, but then
Yeah.
the grandparents become totally opposite.
Very
You
different. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask you. So, and then the grandchildren can say, "Well, grandma, you did do this," and then grandma will be like, "Yeah, I did actually. I'm really sorry." And it's like a
Yeah.
totally different.
Like,
It's
who are
what?
you?
Yes. What is that? I don't. What is happening there? I don't fully understand. What is that about?
Yeah, yeah, that happens. That happens a lot, and it's confusing. I hear people say, "I have a good relationship with my grandma, but I don't have with my mother." And my
Yes.
mother and my grandmother didn't have a good relationship, and I'm like, so grandma started changing with age, did she? And
Right.
so your mother and her don't have any connection, but you do. So try to understand your mother's story with your grandmother, because it might not be a great one. It might be a story of, that's what we're talking about now, being passed on. So sometimes with age, isn't it? People mellow with age. They're changing, maybe they're learning some things, they're regretting. But sometimes some of these very people who want to be really cool grandma to your children, apologize, model some beautiful things, will not apologize to you. They will not acknowledge that, I didn't do this with you and I'm sorry. And that would have gone such a long way. But sometimes age, people with age, people change. They're not the harsh 30-year-old
Spicy.
mother that you had. Yeah, the feisty 30-year-old mother that you had. Now they're a mellow 60-year-old who their knee hurt. And some of
Little
them change.
hugs.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, because
so
I've always, yeah, because a lot of, I heard, like you said, it's interesting because I think it has, sometimes it skips and it's like, grandma now says, or granddad says, I'm sorry, baby girl, and
and you're like,
then, what?
who are you? What's happening? What's happening here? What's happening here? Yeah. So thank you for raising that, because I think a lot of people have that challenge on that story.
How
And
do
I
they
think
work through that? How do you, because like you said, you actually, for example, if you've got a daughter who doesn't have a good relationship with their mother, but the grandma now has a really good relationship with her daughter, which is the
yeah,
grand. How do you reconcile that if they never apologize? For those that are listening that maybe are going through that, how do,
yeah,
because sometimes it can even cause possibly jealousy and resentment.
absolutely. Absolutely. Between mother and daughter.
That's
And
right.
it's really a generational thing that is happening there. But yeah, so the resolution, sometimes talking to your daughter about sharing your story. I am really big on that, Cynthia. Share our stories with our children, because sometimes we're acting out of our story, we're living it, and we're not telling them why we're making certain decisions, why we do the things that we do. we're not saying that to them. So I think it's really okay to say, I know that you have a good relationship with grandma, but grandma and I didn't have a good relationship. This is what happened. We didn't have secure attachment. And because of that, she abandoned me. You know, she left me. That's a lot of people's story in our community here. She left me in the Caribbean, in Africa, wherever, and came here. And when I joined her, I was 12 and she had more children. And I never felt connected to her because I didn't know her. And over the years, she hasn't done anything to do that. So I know that you had more time with her in your formative years than I did. Tell your children the stories that shape you. I think that will really go a long way in releasing some of the tension and conflict that is in some mother-daughter relationships, father-son relationships. It will understanding. Research shows that sometimes children won't understand the story of their parents until they're about 30, and it
Right.
makes sense because the brain is developing and so much things are happening, and it doesn't excuse the hurt that happens, but it helps give a context and a frame for
Right.
it. So I think, tell her your story. Say, she's great, and I don't want you to. I love the relationship that you guys have, but I don't have it because she's not been that to me. And despite the hurt that she's caused me, she's never apologized. And I find that really hard to deal with. So, how does the woman who is now living with the hurt, how does she watch all of that and not become bitter?
That's right.
Because bitterness is the fruit of anger and resentment. So, for
Right.
me, not to become bitter is to heal the hurt, the root, get a good therapist to work through the disconnection between you and your mother and work through that, because the fact that you and your daughter don't have a relationship is just the trickle effect. It's the same thing passing on, and you don't want to wait until she have children to be able to connect with, so
Yes.
do the work to heal your anger and resentment, so that the bitterness is not bearing fruits in the relationship between you and your daughter.
Fantastic. But
And
it's anger, because one of the things I talk when I think about emotions, I always feel like people shouldn't suppress their emotions. Like if you're angry, you should acknowledge it, that actually I am
absolutely.
angry and I am upset. But it's, to me, I call it like key performance indicators of emotions. You know,
Right, right. Well, yeah, it is, isn't it? It is. It's
you know,
telling you to watch your KPIs of your emotion and
emotions. Yes,
act on it. Yeah,
yes.
for real,
So
for
what
sure.
is it telling you? What are the key performance? What is it, the foundations of these, the anger? What is it telling you? What is causing the anger? What is underneath it? And get deep into it to find out what is a key performance. What is it telling you that you need to work on? You know, is this key performance, is it a red, is it a yellow, is it a green? What is going on here that we need to work on to actually make sure that they actually are healthy and it's expressed in the right way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love how I've never connected, that accounting language to emotions, but you're right. You're right. They're telling us a story about what's going on. And when you pay attention to those, then you'll know how to act. But I think that the message we want to leave with you is, if you recognize you're passing on this kind of wealth to your children, we want to encourage you to get help for you, so that what you're passing on to your children, what they're seeing and witnessing and experiencing is something very different. We want to pass on the kind of generational wealth, the new wealth of conflict management skills, conflict resolution skills, emotional regulation techniques, stress management. We want to pass on emotional language. We want them to be able to own what's going on with them, acknowledge their emotions and work through it, not suppress it and hide it, because it comes out in so many of our relationships. Any last
Yeah,
words, Cynthia, before we go?
I think you said it all, Joanna. I think it was perfect. Yes, exactly that. You know,
Well,
and also probably the last thing I would say is that just keep going. Don't
yeah,
stop. You may fall down. Some days you may not be at the top of what you want to be or what you thought you was going to be able to do when it comes to emotions about passing those wealth. But do not stop. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep walking that walk.
I keep going. Thank you, Cynthia, for coming and sharing with us. Before we go, tell us your name of your podcast and where people can find and follow it.
Right. So yes, the podcast we've got is called Interg, so Into God. It's on the YouTube channel called Interg TV. You can find us on that. It's an interesting program where we get panelists to bring subject matters they've ever seen on social media, a book, a quote that they read, like I had the quote that we're using now, a book, a film, and we don't talk about it before we get onto the sofa, or well, it's no longer a sofa, it's a chairs, and we discuss it individually about our subject matter. And it's a real way of discussing and bringing out things, some. And the reason why I did it in this way was because there's some things that will catch my eye that may not catch somebody else's eye,
Yeah.
on social media. And so everybody brings their own flavor, their own ways and discussion points that they want to talk about. And it's about edifying and bringing people to an understanding, also finding solutions for these things that we're discussing as well.
Yeah, it really interesting podcast. So follow Into G TV
Yes.
on YouTube.
YouTube. Yeah.
Thank
And we've also got
you.
Instagram as well.
It's also on Instagram,
It's on
right?
Instagram, yes.
Thank you, Cynthia, for coming and for spending the time with us. I love having conversations with you because we kind of have some similar interests, and I absolutely love it. Thank you also for watching and for sharing. Please share the podcast with those who you think might benefit, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join us on the next story.
Bye.